Acts chapter 21 and 22. Here we go. We're right at the end here. We are recording. No, I'm waiting for Naomi. She'll come in a minute.
And you said 21.
Right at the end of chapter 21. Yeah. So we are somewhere around here trying to decide when the best.
We found out he wasn't an Egyptian. That's where he went.
Yeah, that's really interesting local color because it doesn't really matter that the Tribune thinks that Paul, who was being beaten in the temple precincts, in the temple court, they thinks he's the Egyptian that caused mischief a few years ago. That none of that matters to the narrative, right? They're just straightening it out. But Luke bothers to report it, and it's another example of just the reality. The vividness of biblical narrative.
Doesn't it give their perspective of what they think they're being doing at the time?
Right, but if you look, of all the things, if you were Luke, of all the things you were going to report about what's going on right now, would you report the fact this little conversation between the Tribune and Paul that he thinks he's the Egyptian from a few years ago, and then he's surprised to find that he speaks Greek? Why does that matter? If you're Luke, I don't know, but he put it in there. So where then that's valuable. That's valuable real estate on a papyrus scroll, right? You don't get a lot of it. He's coming to the end of it, and he chose to put that in there. So, you know what, you got to think about that. Why are we talking about it? Because it's there. We're not going to talk about it what isn't there. We want to talk about what's there. So it's there. So that's what we talk about. So the Paul, who has, bless his heart, trying to do a favor for James, finds himself in a rather undignified situation of being accused of having brought an Ephesian, a Gentile, into the inner court of the temple, which looks something like that. So in this part right here, Trophimus, who accompanied him from Asia, from Ephesus, after his third journey, there's Ephesian Asian Jews who have showed up for the festival, or they're following Paul. But they think they recognize Trophimus, and so they take their chance and they accuse Paul of doing that because they can get the death sentence for that, like Stephen. So the parallels between Stephen, Jesus, and Paul are piling up. All three of them sort of, if you will, in a sense, come to an end at the temple over the issue of the temple. Jesus was accused of subverting the temple. Stephen was accused of subverting the temple. I think I pulled that up. So if you look at that one right here, he's in this synagogue of Hellenistic Jews speaking. Look at the accusation. This is Stephen, some 3 years earlier. We heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God, stirred up the people. This man incessantly speaks against this holy place and the law, which was also the accusation that Jesus had, and now it's the accusation that Paul has. So those parallels have got to be deliberate. It's just interesting. So that's Stephen. The 22, 3 years later, if this is 56 or 56 AD, Pastor, you going to go with that? 56 AD here? Then if Paul was converted in 33, let's go back to the timeline. Look at this beautifully colorful timeline. I want it closed. Get small. Why can't I make that small? That's interesting. Won't go smaller. Now it's bigger. Oh, that's as small as it gets. So, if we're right here, right after Ephesus, if Paul was converted here, which is what I think, about 33, why do I think that? Because in Galatians, he reports a 17-year span between when he's writing now in the Galatians and when he was converted. And if he wrote Galatians somewhere right in here, then we're back to 33 or so AD, which is to say Paul was converted almost immediately after Jesus died and rose again. And so all those events in the first 8 chapters of Acts up through the conversion of the Samaritans, and then the push out in Acts 12 and 13 into the Hellenistic world, Galatia, that all occurs very early. I'm sorry, not that part. The part up to Samaria, all that stuff from, let's say, to Acts, from Acts 1 to Acts 8 happens right away. And we're off to the races with the Gentiles. And then there's this dead time while Paul's out doing his thing, and the church is developing. The church in Antioch is developing. And then Paul finally appears on the scene somewhere around here in the narrative. He's not been idle. He's been doing things, but in the narrative, he doesn't appear until right around 49-50 or something like that. That's my read on the timeline. The point being, of course, if Paul was converted that early, then those beliefs about the resurrection and so forth were already around at that time. So they were not the result of embellishment over the course of decades by the church. That's nonsense. That's historical nonsense. So that's one of the reasons that that's valuable. But anyway, if that's the case, then we're in 56. And 23 years earlier, Paul participates in this stoning of Stephen. 23 years later, for the reason that he was blaspheming the temple and the law. And 23 years later, he finds himself giving a defense of himself before the people after having been beaten for blaspheming the temple and the law, essentially. And the irony of that could not have been lost on him. And in fact, he's going to bring up Stephen's name before Agrippa and Festus in a little bit, chapter 26, I think. Fascinating. You can't make this stuff up. If you were going to make this stuff up, you wouldn't make this stuff up. You'd make up other stuff. That's how I think of it. Okay, so he gets on the they pull him out. The Romans do. Again, we're right here now. This is the Antonia Fortress, or somebody's rendition of the Antonia Fortress, where there's a tribune in charge. The tribune is the commander of 1,000 Chiliarchus. Centurion is 100, from which we get our century. Interesting, we don't use Chiliarchus for 1,000. But anyway, the tribune now allows Paul to speak to the people because he just wants to calm the situation down and figure out what's going on. So he's probably on these steps right here, and there's a mob out here, and the situation is still not calm. But at least they got him out of the temple, because this could ignite like a powder keg that quick. So the tribune has a lot at stake and a lot to account for if this goes bad. There's a reason that the Roman garrison was attached to the temple with 2 guard towers that overlooked the courtyard. If there was trouble in Israel, this is where it was going to originate from. And the Romans, being Romans and not stupid, being really good at building empire and knowing how the peoples are, they take care of it. There's 1,000 troops in here, and there's probably watchmen looking down here. So they are probably pouring through the gate and into the temple precincts in a heartbeat. Tribune comes in personally to try to sort through the situation. I talked about this last week. The parallels with the situation in Ephesus are too many to count. Some shouting one thing, some another. The place was in total confusion. The Tribune couldn't figure out what was going on because of the riotous crowd. Same thing as Ephesus, only instead of being pagan Gentiles there, it's Jews here. But Acts does this a lot. Luke does this a lot, where he rhymes the narrative, right? He doesn't repeat the narrative. It's the same kind of story in a different context. So the situation in Ephesus is played out in Jerusalem, but it's not exactly the same, but it rhymes. Situation with Paul in the temple getting beaten rhymes with what happened to Stephen, who died because he was stoned, and what happened to Jesus, who was crucified. And so in 2 of those cases, in Paul's case and in Paul's case and Jesus' case, the Romans come in and try to calm the situation down, and actually, in a sense, in one case, try to save one of them, Jesus. Pontius Pilate did. And here they do save Paul. And they're going to continue to save Paul. And in fact, they're going to end up saving his life. The Romans are, once they find out he's a Roman. Who? The Romans poured into the court.
Okay,
But they studiously avoided the sanctity of the inner temple.
you weren't letting.
In here?
Yeah.
No, they didn't, they wouldn't have gone in there. No, not yet.
And you've got the fact that they're already, they own these people basically, they allow them to worship, so they have the right to do whatever they want.
Who?
Well,
The Romans are allowed to do everything they want, but they don't want to increase the problem.
correct. So
They
they
could go
try to
before
do
the
some.
Gentiles, but they couldn't go before the Jews.
Right, here's the court of the
So they
Gentiles.
probably got- I think they probably didn't fall on the-
Yeah, that's what I think too, yeah. So the emperor Nero, is Nero the one who's going to set up a statue in the temple? I think that was Nero.
And probably during the Greeks, what you talking about, the Greeks,
Antiochus Epiphanes did it. He sacrificed a pig,
yeah.
but that was, he was trying to Hellenize, Jerusalem, Israel. And in order to do that, he needed to basically destroy their attachment to this way of life. And the result of that was the insurrection that led to the Jews actually gaining their freedom for 100 years. So that didn't work. But now Paul, now in this case, later on, I believe Nero is going to do something similar to that.
I thought it was a guy called Nero.
Well, that was,
About 660 years.
that was-
The Jewish rebellion started.
That was Nero. Nero was the emperor during the Jewish rebellion, the revolt. Vespasian, after the year of the
70?
after the year of the four emperors, when it got unstable, 69 and 70, Vespasian became the emperor. He was actually working their Jewish revolt, but after the instability in Rome, he went back, became emperor. He sent his son back, Titus, who finished off the Jews in the Jewish revolt. And then Titus eventually, after Vespasian, became the emperor, I think in 68 or something like that. So all this is swirling around here. We're only 8 years, 10 years away from the Jewish revolt at this point. But you can see the emotions run high, sanctity of the temple, all that comes into play in the revolt. And there's the Romans right there, right on it. So they come in and they get in there in time to save Paul. Remember, God has already told Paul, fear not, famous last words for Paul, fear not, as you head to Jerusalem, as you have testified to me, as you will testify to me in Jerusalem, which he is about to do, about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify about me in Rome. So Paul knows that he's going to survive this, but the reason he survives it is because the Romans save him, and they don't yet know that he's a Roman. We'll go back and talk about Roman in just a minute.
Maybe it was so chaotic, he just gave his time before he made it known.
Who?
Paul, like.
He would have, if he could have made it known he made it known as soon as he possibly could. Yeah. I mean, you don't know if he was gagged. You don't know what.
Well, didn't they have to carry him out? It was probably loud. You know.
Romans were probably not known for carrying, especially if they thought you were a troublemaker. They're not doing this because they're nice people, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be beyond, one of these legionnaires while they're carrying Paul to give him an uppercut. I mean, it's not like they were nice until they find out that he's a Roman. So when the tribune finally gets him, he's probably a battered mess. He looks like anything but a dignified Roman. And I really don't know how those people proved their Roman citizenship.
I understand, they had tablets to carry with them. that Said they were like Romans.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
don't know how you do that.
I don't know. Is there a signet? Is there some kind of ring? Is there?
What I read was they had wax tablets. The wax tablets were not very.
But what do you do? What if you lose it? I mean, you have to carry it around and now you're in a mob.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. I've read the thing about the wax tablets.
I'll bet it was.
It's true, but I don't know that, how do you carry one around unless you have a pocket? I don't think they have pockets. So I have no idea.
I bet the penalty for impersonating a Roman was.
Right.
Probably
Well, that's
pretty
what I'm
high.
saying is he probably said, basically that he was Roman, so they take your word because to your point, the penalty of lying is.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's sort of saying the same thing. He says he's a citizen of no mean city.
Yeah, but
There's some
okay.
cities that if you're born in a city,
Yes.
you're a Roman citizen.
Maybe that's what, maybe the Tribune, who we'll now read about, didn't take the hint when he said that,
I think that's
because
true.
he did not figure it out. So let's go ahead and head back to the text. So this is what they're calling the commander, which is a tribune, which is the commander of 1,000. Paul says to him politely, "May I say something to you?" As he's brought into the barracks up the steps or something. So he speaks in Greek. He's a Hellenistic Jew from one of the provinces. "Oh, you know Greek," says the tribune. "I'm surprised to hear you speak Greek because I thought you were the Egyptian who stirred up a revolt with the 4,000 men a few years ago and then escaped. So the 4,000 men got put down, but the Egyptian escaped." So he's out there somewhere, and this tribune just naturally figures, here comes the Egyptian again. He's trying to do it again, which would explain why he just so quick. Now, if he'd have known it was just this Jewish argument about religion, he might not have been he might have weighed the situation a little bit more and just let it play out. I mean, because does he really care if Paul gets killed in the court? I don't know. They didn't seem to care when Stephen did, because they would have known about the Stephen thing. I mean, the Antonia Fortress was right there. And Herod built it, so it was already there in 33, 34. But if he thinks it's the Egyptian and there's going to be a revolt, that would explain why he comes in with some centurions. Some centurions means at least 2, which means at least 200 troops come pouring into the temple precincts. So that's Romans. Overwhelming force and presence. Once they see that, they stop beating Paul and they back away. Romans take Paul, but they're haranguing and so forth. Romans keep their composure. They get him out. They lead him up the steps. Paul stops the tribune, who apparently is right there. Says, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. Speaks in Greek. "Oh, he's not the Egyptian. This is not what I thought it was."
Wouldn't an Egyptian know how to speak Greek? They're learning.
Apparently not. All we have is this. I mean, also, depending on where the tribune was, you'd have kind of different dialects or accents and so forth. So, you'd have to deal with that. So he speaks Greek, but is obviously not, even if you had a Greek speaking Egyptian, he wouldn't sound like this, like a Southerner or a New Yorker or something like that. But anyway, so you're not the Egyptian? No, I'm a Jew of Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen, to the pastor's point, of an important city. That's one of those Lucan constructs right there. A citizen of no mean city, no insignificant city, Roman colony. I beg you, allow me to speak to the people. So the tribune goes, okay, this is a Jewish thing. I'm going to go ahead and try to let the Jews take care of their internal business here. So yeah, you can go ahead. When he gave him permission, Paul, standing on the stairs, motioned to the people with his hand. And when there was a great hush, what will this man say? He spoke to them in the Hebrew dialect, meaning probably Aramaic, which is the native language of the Jews and Jesus and Peter. Aramaic was also spoken by people in the surrounding, especially on the eastern side of the empire. That was Aramaic too. But this is interesting because, so let's go one more verse. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense, we'll go 2 verses, which I now offer to you. That's what Paul says. When they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet. So he waves his hand. They want to hear what he has to say. He says this. He speaks in Aramaic, probably. I'll get back to that in a second. And so the centurion is surprised that he speaks Greek. And then the Jews are surprised that he speaks Aramaic. So everybody's surprised.
So he's speaking before the Greek, before the.
What?
So he's speaking at least 3 languages in this story.
2, Aramaic and Greek. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Everybody is confused. Nobody knows what's going on. Everybody's confused. It's based on false information that he brought the Gentile into the temple, into the inner court. The Jews are surprised he speaks Aramaic. The Romans are surprised that he speaks Greek. It's Ephesus in a sense on steroids. It's just still total confusion. Only the tribune can't just make everybody go away. He can't just send everybody home like the Ephesians did. because the Ephesians didn't get this far. They didn't actually beat anybody. They just ran them to the stadium, to the theater. And, they gathered the people that you need to do that sort of thing. And then they had a gigantic shouting match. Great as Artemis of the Ephesians for a couple of hours to shout down these Jews who hate Artemis of the Ephesians. So the Gentiles are not going to miss their chance to, to poke the eyes of the Jews. So they take their chance, and then it kind of ends, everybody goes home. But here, there's no getting out of this. These events are going to continue to accelerate or degenerate, however you want to think of it.
That because they got the Romans involved.
Yeah, if the Jews would have had their way, Paul would be dead by now.
The Romans are involved, so it's got to go through the chain.
But the Romans now that the Romans have taken control, Roman law comes into play. He's got to do an interrogation, which he's about to do right after this little speech by Paul. He still does, after Paul finishes the speech, he still doesn't know what the problem is. It's even more confusing to him. So the Tribune. This has happened. He's got to give a report. He's a military commander. He's got to give a report up the chain about these events. Everybody, the Syrian legate, who is over the Palestinian authority, Romans, the Syrian authority, has got to give a report to those people. And if they don't like the report, they show up. I mean, the Romans in the Syrian legate. I forget who that guy's name is. They're very, very serious about this, very organized. And they're really good at empire. So there's going to be a big after action report on this. Everybody's got to be satisfied that we don't have a real problem with Jerusalem like we will in 10 years when the Jewish revolt happens for real. It's really kind of funny how this kind of foreshadows the revolt in a way. It's not in the narrative, but it really does. Yeah, the Jewish revolt is not in the narrative either, but 10 years beforehand, this happens. Go ahead.
So it's been happening. Sure.
Yes, the Egyptian would be an example of that. He was a foreshadowing of the Jewish revolt. But it's always right underneath the surface. The zealots are out there. Yeah, everybody's ready to cause trouble. The Romans know it. Ergo, the Antonia fortress attached to not next door, attached and overlooking the temple, the outer court. If they felt it necessary. I mean, these were probably the most, I don't know, that's a good question. How many revolts were there in the Roman Empire? How often did they happen? We're mainly interested in.
They had it all the time, concerned all the time. They lived with those, but you had a lot of Messianic people going around like that, Egyptian, who were getting groups together to throw off the Roman Empire because they thought that was the Messiah.
Yeah, so pastor's talking about the Egyptian, that sort of thing happening all the time. There was the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 2nd century after the destruction of Jerusalem. And what's weird? I think at that point that Jerusalem became a Roman colony. Which means they just moved in. So that's it. We're just going to move in and take over. And Jerusalem became a Roman colony. That's another thing that's another way you could solve the problem. You can reward a city by them becoming a Roman colony, or you could punish a city by saying, we Romans are going to move in, we're going to relocate people, we're going to take over. And that's it. We're going to end the problem. So, but it's a little on the edge of my knowledge of the history of the thing.
You find that whole rebellion thing is a big thing. Kokhba, I never remember that word. It's in
Bar Kokhba?
Bar Kokhba rebellion.
Yeah.
They were downplaying her because there was the Messianic idea that pushed Rome. It caused the Jewish rebellion more than anything. It was one of the causes.
Yeah.
And so when they started the other rebellion, they moved away from the Messianic idea. That became the Reformed Jewish idea started coming in. Well, that doesn't develop until later in Germany. That's where some of that came in. They're moving away from this idea of the Messianic thing, because the Messianic thing was like everybody in their brother thought they were the Messiah.
Yeah.
And they were getting all these people around, and these Jews were rebelling, and killing me. Probably Barabbas was a messianic person too. He tried to cause a rebellion. He was freed with Jesus. He thought, Pilate thought they'd kill him instead of Jesus.
Yeah, he's talking
That's
about,
why they couldn't figure out why Jesus wouldn't lead rebellion, because he was Messiah. I was saying he was Messiah.
yeah, so he's talking about the Bar Kokhba rebellion and the messianic hope that infused Israel, that just energized Israel from the intertestamental time between the two testaments, kind of developed there, all the way through the period of the New Testament, and then even after the destruction of Israel, destruction of Jerusalem.
Even today.
Yeah, it's still still goes on today. And
Not like it did then.
no, the consequences is there are all these false, read about it in the Bible, all these false Christs appear, these false messiahs. Get rid of the sort of spiritual element of the word Christ and just think anointed king that they were waiting for, and that's a false Christ. And just as there are many, is it John that says just as there are many false Christs? Yeah, they're all over the place, people claiming to be the Messiah.
Well, the point was that they thought, because they were viewing, the point was, well, they can viewing Christ as the guy's gonna throw off the Roman oppression. So if you're gonna be the Christ, and you're the Christ, in their definition, you had to throw off the Roman
Right.
oppression, which means you had to be a general of an army. So you stirred up a rebellion.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's not Paul, that's Jesus
Yeah.
in their mind, and that's a lot of other people. But interesting times, everything's in flux, and this scene really encapsulates an awful lot of it. You've seen this before, you're probably getting sick of it, but.
One of the things that ruled during this period was an attitude of discontentment,
Yes,
an attitude of what I'm doing does not work, where do I go? And I think that helped the church to establish, there's all this unrest, and they're looking for quiet, they're looking for something that's true. And here comes a Christian religion, and it answers some of those questions, a lot of those questions, if not all.
yeah, it really did. Christianity really did satisfy a lot of the longing that paganism couldn't, and that Judaism wouldn't, because of its exclusivity. And I think that was part of its appeal. But that's good stuff. That's a bigger discussion. We can have that discussion sometime. So back to the map here. I mean, the timeline. What's that? You tried what? You tried to,
He was bringing in that thought.
Yeah,
you tried to derail me?
no,
He did.
oh,
He
he
did,
did, really?
yeah. No, I think that why Christianity was so successful in the first 3 centuries is an extraordinary story.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of it was because something new had come into the world shouldn't say world. Something new had happened to the people of the way, meaning Christianity. And that was the infusion of the Holy Spirit. And that was the power and the power that came from that, the teaching that came from that. All of those things are new to any religion, rather than God being somebody up above that we have to give a sacrifice to. Here comes a God down here to our place and gives us a sacrifice.
And who is,
I've never heard of
and
such a thing.
and who is not an idol
Yeah,
that can be appeased.
right. And he's alive. He's not dead. There's not idols made with hands, but a God that comes and lives inside of you. It's totally
Without you
different.
yourself becoming a god.
Right.
Yeah, that's worth the discussion. I don't know enough about it I know something about those first 3 centuries, but remember by about 325 AD, Christianity will have taken over the Roman Empire. They're a more remarkable achievement that can only be, in my view, be explained from the divine standpoint. But that history from now till Constantine in the Council of Nicaea in 325. It's an extraordinary story. So Paul here is so, this whole scene and the people involved is so reflective of all these elements that you see on this timeline. You have this Roman named Paul who's Hellenistic. He's a product of Hellenism because he's Greek speaking. He's born in Tarsus in Cilicia. He's sectarian because he's a Pharisee. He therefore believes in resurrection. He's a product of the exile, the southern exile. But he's also a product of the return from exile under the Persians because he has a Jerusalem to go back to from Cilicia and a temple, and there's a temple there, and there's rabbis there.
It's a Swiss Army knife. of
You get all,
Christianity.
he's all of it. He's every single bit of it. Now you have this other Roman tribune come in and they speak to each other in Greek, and you transfer back and forth from Greek to Aramaic, because I'm sure while Paul's talking to them in Aramaic, the Romans are talking to him in Greek. So he's got to go back, somehow has to go back and forth to communicate with both groups. And it must, what you wouldn't get for 10 seconds of video. I mean, it would have been an extraordinary scene as the event, as the elements of this timeline and this stuff are just represented in this one single scene. Acts chapter 21, 22. It's incredible in my view. You look confused, Jocelyn. All right.
Yeah, I'm sure I didn't look.
Are you not focusing on what he's saying?
All right.
No, I know he said basically.
Right.
Brethren and fathers, hear my defense, which I now offer to you. Sounds awful lot like Stephen. Brethren and fathers, hear me. But Stephen doesn't say, hear of me a defense, which I now offer. He just says, hear me, because Stephen ain't going to offer a defense. Stephen's going to go on the attack after he finishes the longest speech in the entire book of Acts. And then he's going for the jugular, you stiff-necked people. He turns the tables on them. He calls them uncircumcised. It does not get more insulting than that. Uncircumcised of heart and ears, always resisting the Holy Spirit. So that was Stephen, for which he got executed. Paul is going to offer a defense of himself because he's not guilty of the thing that they've been accused. He's been accused of. He's been accused of bringing an Ephesian into the temple. He didn't bring an Ephesian into the temple. So he's going to offer a defense. Now, as far as this Hebrew dialect thing, so there's the Aramaic language and there's also the Hebrew language, which I don't know a lot about. And there's been some debate about it. Well, Paul knew not only Aramaic and Greek, he also knew Hebrew. He was actually speaking in Hebrew. He probably wouldn't have done that to a mob. These are just people. They're just, who knows how many people there are. So most people think it was Aramaic. Here's the translations. New International Version has Aramaic. Almost everyone else has. The New Living Translation punts in their own language.
Cowards,
English language, what's that?
cowards.
English language version, Hebrew, King James Hebrew.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's the solid one.
What is the word Hebraeus? I mean, it is the word for Hebrew, so. But it probably means Aramaic. And then the only other one that has Aramaic is the Christian Standard Bible. I didn't bother going back to the Message. I don't know what they would have said. Would have been
You
interesting.
like playing with that one?
And I do. So that's the Hebrew dialect or Aramaic, probably.
Wasn't it probably something more local that caught their attention so strongly?
That could be it too. So remember, he was raised in Jerusalem.
Right.
So he may,
Right there.
yes, he may know their vernacular
How did they not know that?
because
He was a
we had
prominent guy when he
20
died.
Glad.
23 years ago, he was a prominent. He may have been prominent. We don't know whether he was prominent or not. All he says is he was
I
advancing.
guess he was a guy that held the post for Stephen. He wasn't terribly prominent.
He was young at that point. Now it's been 20 some odd years.
Probably has a beard.
And all they know now is what they've heard for the last, who knows how long.
So now they're going to get to know who he is.
Yeah,
You're gonna get to know who he is. That's right.
that's kind of
In the-
Jesus
in
thing too.
Aramaic.
He hid himself until.
Yep. I am a Jew, but let's see, born in Tarsus of Cilicia. So He acknowledges, yes, this right here, I'm a Hellenistic Jew, a product of the exile. Just like so many of you are, because it's festival and there's all kinds of Hellenistic Jews out there in the temple precincts. That's how they knew it was him, because they were Hellenistic Jews from Asia.
And that made him a Roman,
No.
that word, did not.
It should have cued some people in. It said to the Tribune, for example, should have been cued in when he said, I'm a citizen. He said to the Tribune, I'm a citizen of Tarsus, no insignificant city, meaning a Roman colony, the leading city of the province of Cilicia, maybe. He should have been cued in and he's saying, I'm a Roman. So maybe Paul did try to tell him he's Roman, and the Tribune just didn't pick up on it because of the commotion. But to the Jews, he just simply says, he doesn't want to emphasize his Romanness. Not to this crowd. So he just says, brought up. Tarsus of Cilicia. I'm born in Tarsus of Cilicia. In fact, he denigrates that. Brought up in this city. I'm a Jerusalemite. Something like that. Not only that, under Gamaliel, who would become the leader of one of the two most important schools of rabbinical thought, the school of Hillel. Eventually Gamaliel would be that. And so he's doing everything he can to give his credentials as a devout Orthodox Jew. He's not leading with, I'm a Christian. He's leading with, I'm one of you, in spite of what you think. I would never do the thing, I would never ever do the thing you're talking about. But he's going to say the wrong thing at the end of this. So he's going to say the wrong word at the very end of this. And that's going to be
Specifically on purpose?
Yes,
He knows that he's doing it.
yes, probably. Yes. It's when he's about to share the gospel, in a sense. He says the thing that confirms their worst fears. Yeah. And
So
then
he strings them along with stuff that they can calm down and then
he's just defending himself. He said, I'm not what you think I am. Brought up strictly according to the law of our fathers, zealous for God, just as you are. I firmly believe Paul was a devout Jew, Orthodox Jew, to the day that he died. He just insisted that you're not going to make the Gentiles do that. There's no admittance or requirement based on that criteria. Counts for nothing. It's a Jewish thing. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women into prisons, men and women, as also the high priest and all the council of the elders can testify to. It's been a long time. So there must have been council members from before who were still on the council. What is a Jewish Christian? He's a Jew who took the next, like Apollos, who took the next step and believed that the Messiah, the promise of the Messiah has been fulfilled. That's exactly the way that he preached it. Everything is true. Everything is true. And now this final act has come to pass. The Messiah has been revealed. So he remains a Jew.
my head jumps to the.
That's no different than another devout Orthodox Jew who doesn't believe that.
Except for the Messiah part.
But that's the most.
That's right. So he is all of this, and now he has embraced the Messiah, the Messianic rule.
He's a devout Jew. My head always jumps to David's sacrifice.
He's going to do a sacrifice. He was in the midst of doing a sacrifice when he got attacked by the Jews, right? And he was there as a demonstration of his orthodoxy. He was there to pay the expenses for the 4 guys that are under a vow that they need to offer sacrifices for to finish off their vow. And he had just gone through the 7 days of purification with them so that he could go into the temple and do the sacrifice. That's what he was doing. He was trying to do this incredibly Orthodox Jewish thing, and he's rewarded for it by almost getting beaten to death. You know, it's hard to come to grips with because we imagine that Paul just abandoned his ancestral traditions. I don't think any of those guys did that.
He's still doing sacrifices, yet. Christ are already died and risen.
He's not sacrificing anything for sins.
It's,
So what is he just?
He's committing a vow. He's completing the vow for these guys.
So they have to do.
They have to do a sacrifice, yeah. We could look, I didn't look it up, but he was under a vow earlier in the narrative. And Kencray had to shave his head. He didn't offer a sacrifice there. What's that?
Why do you have to do sacrifice?
Because that's what the code says. That's what the book, that's what the good book says.
And that doesn't change despite.
Apparently not. Yeah, I mean, you get a little queasy with this because we imagine a certain picture of this, that these guys, we imagine that there's radical discontinuity on this line. That right here, or really right here, let's say right here, everything changed with the Red Cross. Everything did not change with the Red Cross. None of these guys believe that. This is one continuous line of activity by God to bring about the redemption of his people. And at this point in history, we're right here.
in fact, what you can say is that Judaism was the vehicle through which God chose to bring in Christianity.
Yes,
It had to be one continuous thought.
yes,
It couldn't have been an eruption. The eruption came because people did not want to see that the way was there, that Christ
Yes.
was there.
yeah, it is an extension of,
Judaism.
it's an extension of everything that they believed before. That
Absolutely.
Jesus said it himself. Oh, foolish men, slow of heart to believe all that the scriptures said about me. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer? It was baked into the cake the whole time. It's one big revelation of redemption from the beginning of the line to the end of the line. And Paul is on it. These guys are on it right here. So that's how he's talking. Remember, he was a Pharisee. Pharisees believed in resurrection. It's very natural for a Pharisee to become a Christian. All they have to have one more belief to make. They just have to take one more little step. That the Messiah has come and has been raised from the dead.
That's what I was gonna say. The difference,
That's it.
the difference between the two is that they look forward to a Messiah. And they still looking forward to the Messiah. We look back and say the Messiah has come.
That's
the
right.
difference.
But you say a little step, it's not a little step, because I feel like it's a complete change of their beliefs.
No. They feel like it's blasphemy of their beliefs.
Okay.
Because
Right,
in order to believe it, you have to believe in a crucified Messiah
right.
who's from Nazareth. Remember, these guys were called Nazarenes. It's a derogatory term. That's what they called them. So another sect of Judaism has arisen. You have Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, Zealots. Now you have Essenes, and now you have the Nazarenes. But the Nazarenes,
You're accepting, I don't want to say this wrong. To accept Christ in their view is to accept a very inferior Messiah.
a contradiction in terms and a disgusting, this man who claimed to be God. Because they could not get their minds around the idea that the Messiah that as the Son of God,
There, my God wouldn't do that.
yes, that's right. As the Son of God, he was the Son of God, not the Son of David, who was the Son of God.
And therefore your
He
God
was.
cannot die on the cross.
Yeah, so you have a crucified God. It's blasphemy every way you can look at it. The Messiah simply could never have been that. And it was repulsive and disgusting in every way to them.
And
So
God wouldn't change.
the very idea that the deity would be a human being, it's unthinkable. Yeah.
So if you're talking to a Jew about the Lord, and you say, I'm a Jew. That means you believe that you're among the Jews that believe that the Messiah has not come to you.
Yes. I mean, you could say you can have the common ground and say, well, I'm not that different from you. You believe he hasn't come yet. I believe he has come yet. Well, all you have to do is get into the details about the Messiah who came, that he was the incarnate God who was crucified. Well, that's where you lose them. That's,
And then you could follow that up by saying, so if I understand you correctly, you believe it's not that Messiah.
yes, that's the heart of the matter. And you're going to hear back that not only is he not the Messiah, he's a false prophet and a false Christ and a blasphemer and all of those things. Yeah, which was what Paul thought, which is why he so fanatically attacked the Nazarenes, if you will, in Judea. It all makes sense. I mean, it's rational. They're not acting irrationally. Their hatred of the Nazarenes computes. It makes sense from their vantage point. They're just wrong because they don't understand their own scriptures, as Jesus said.
But sometimes I get a chance to say, well, this could be true.
That's right. And they may say, no, it's not. Yeah.
Have a great day.
So we gotta close.
So they still sacrifice?
No, they're not. No. I mean, it can be considered barbaric today. They'd never get away with it. So in the currently constituted world order, they'd never get away with it. So you think of it as really then it's like the period of the exile never ended. Because all those Hellenistic Jews in the empire, they couldn't offer sacrifices. They're not gonna, they're just waiting for God to solve this problem. They're still waiting. God is going to fix the situation. He is going to reinvigorate his covenant. All of that is still going to
They're
happen.
not worried about God questioning them for not attempting to do what they're supposed to.
Yeah.
I think that also about,
They what?
they sort of turn the Old Testament into symbolism.
I mean, not the Orthodox Jews, I don't think. I mean, they're
No, probably not the Orthodox, but there's a lot of other ones. What do they call it? I forget.
Hasidic,
Yeah.
Reform, which I don't know enough to talk about, but it's still there. You have them here. There, you know, I mean, if you're a Jew and you're living in the United States, then you're essentially an extension of the exile. Still, they were the Hellenists back then. Well, now they're here and there and everywhere else. So you still have this problem that things are not quite right, and we're still waiting. We're in a waiting period, waiting for God to take action, and it all computes. Okay, let's go ahead and stop here, which is we're at that chapter, verse 3 of chapter 22. So I'll go ahead and stop the feed here. Appreciate your time. See you.